The grand restaurant bustled with life. Crystal chandeliers sent shimmering light across the lavish dining area, where guests dressed in their finest sipped wine and exchanged polite laughter. The clinking of silverware and soft jazz in the background created an air of exclusivity, but all of it came to a halt when the glass doors opened. A figure stepped in, towering and confident, yet dressed in stark contrast to the venue's grandeur. The towering titan wore a simple gray t-shirt, well-worn sweatpants, and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. His presence was commanding, his frame impossible to ignore, but his attire drew curious and judgmental stares. Emma, the hostess, was the first to intercept him. Her polished uniform, neat bun, and practiced smile screamed professionalism, but the sharpness in her eyes betrayed her disdain. She glanced at his clothes, her gaze hovering on his sneakers before flicking back to his face. "Good evening," she said, her voice crisp. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The comment, laced with condescension, was loud enough to draw attention. Several diners turned their heads, their curiosity piqued. "Yes, I'd like a table," the towering titan replied, his deep voice calm and steady. Emma hesitated, as if waiting for him to second-guess his decision. When he didn't, her lips curled into a tight smile. "Of course, right this way," she said, her tone suggesting anything but sincerity. The scene unfolded like a silent play. As Emma led him through the room, whispers rippled among the diners. Some murmured with surprise, others with judgment. The sharp contrast between the restaurant's polished decor and his casual appearance made him an anomaly. Yet despite the stares and whispers, he walked with steady, deliberate steps, his demeanor unshaken. Emma, however, had already decided her verdict. In her mind, someone dressed like this couldn't possibly belong here. Her mission, unspoken yet clear, was to make him feel out of place. Emma's heels clicked sharply against the polished floor as she led the towering titan through the restaurant. Her steps were deliberate, each one sending an unspoken message of judgment. The grandeur of the dining room sparkled around them, gleaming chandeliers, tables adorned with fine linen, and patrons dressed in designer attire. Yet Emma made no effort to stop at any of the elegant tables near the center. Instead, she guided him past the main dining area, through a quieter, less glamorous section, and toward a small table tucked into a dim corner near the kitchen. The clatter of dishes and the faint smell of food wafting through the service door filled the air. She stopped abruptly and gestured toward the table, her smile thin and forced. "This spot should suit your style," she said, her voice tinged with mockery. She placed the menu on the table with a thud, loud enough to draw a few glances from nearby patrons. The towering titan, unbothered, smiled calmly. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady and polite. He took a seat, his large frame seeming almost out of place in the modest chair. He adjusted himself with quiet dignity, ignoring the curious and judgmental stares that lingered on him from across the room. Emma lingered for a moment, her smirk faltering as she waited for him to show some sign of discomfort or annoyance. But when none came, she turned on her heel and strode back toward the front of the restaurant. At a nearby table, Lisa, a sharp-eyed businesswoman, leaned toward her dining companion. "She's treating him like he doesn't belong," she muttered. Her companion, a quiet man with a thoughtful expression, nodded. "And yet he doesn't seem bothered. Look at him. He's completely calm." Lisa shook her head, glancing toward the corner table. "It's unprofessional and rude. He hasn't done anything to deserve this." Meanwhile, at the center of the room, Mr. and Mrs. Carter observed the situation silently. Mr. Carter, a distinguished man with silver hair, sipped his wine, his expression contemplative. "He's handling this with an impressive amount of grace," Mr. Carter murmured. "Most people would have said something by now." Mrs. Carter nodded. "He's clearly used to situations like this. He doesn't feel the need to prove anything." Back at the counter, Emma muttered under her breath to Jake, her colleague. "I don't understand why someone dressed like that would come here. He clearly doesn't fit in." Jake frowned slightly but didn't respond. He glanced toward the Titan, who was now skimming the menu with genuine interest, his composure unshaken. As Emma moved to serve another table, she stole a glance at him, her thoughts brimming with irritation. "He'll leave once he sees the menu prices," she muttered to herself. The towering Titan remained unbothered, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to Emma's simmering frustration. Around him, Whispers from other tables grew louder. Some diners cast disapproving looks at Emma, while others simply watched the scene unfold with curiosity. Lisa leaned closer to her companion, her voice low but firm. She's pushing him, and he's just letting her dig her own hole. That calmness, it's throwing her off. Her companion nodded. It's like he's challenging her without saying a word. Emma returned to the service counter, her frustration mounting. Slamming the menu onto the countertop, she muttered to Jake, "People like that don't last long in places like this. Just wait until the check comes." Jake looked toward the corner table again, his expression conflicted. "Maybe he's just here to enjoy the food," he said quietly. Emma scoffed, rolling her eyes. "He's here for attention. Trust me, he'll bolt when it's time to pay." At his table, the Titan continued to peruse the menu, his large hands holding the leather-bound pages with care. Despite the whispers and stares, he remained composed, occasionally glancing around the room as though taking in the ambiance. Lisa watched him from her table, her admiration growing. "He's got more poise than anyone else here," she said softly. "I just hope she doesn't push him too far." Her companion nodded. "He's not the kind of man who needs to raise his voice to make a statement. You can see it in how he carries himself." The scene ended with Emma casting another glance toward the Titan's table, her irritation barely concealed. She straightened her posture, as if preparing for the next move in a silent battle only she seemed to be fighting. Emma's frustration grew as the minutes ticked by. Every attempt she made to provoke the towering Titan seemed to fall flat. He remained composed, flipping through the menu with an air of genuine curiosity. Around him, whispers from diners rippled across the room, their tones a mix of disapproval and intrigue. Emma decided to escalate. She approached his table, the forced politeness in her smile barely masking her irritation. "Have you decided on anything, sir?" she asked, her voice louder than necessary, drawing the attention of nearby diners. "Yes," he said, looking up at her with his steady gaze. "I'll have the filet mignon rossini." Emma hesitated, her eyebrows raising in surprise. The filet mignon rossini was the most expensive dish on the menu, a signature item that screamed sophistication and wealth. Quickly regaining her composure, she let out a faint, derisive laugh. "Are you sure?" she asked, her tone laced with mockery. "It's a very refined dish. Not everyone is accustomed to it." The Titan nodded calmly. "I'm sure. I'm looking forward to it." Her smirk faltered as she scribbled down the order, but she recovered quickly, turning on her heel and heading back toward the counter. Once there, she leaned toward Jake, the soft-spoken waiter. "He just ordered the most expensive thing on the menu," she whispered, her voice dripping with disdain. "I bet he doesn't even know what it is." Jake glanced at her, uncomfortable with her tone. "Maybe he just wants to try something special," he said. Emma rolled her eyes. "Number people like that only pick the priciest thing to show off. Let's see what happens when the bill comes." Back at his table, the Titan sat quietly, his demeanor unshaken. He gazed around the room, his expression one of calm observation. The clinking of glasses and the hum of conversations continued, but the tension was palpable. Nearby diners stole glances at him, their curiosity piqued by his unbothered attitude. At Lisa's table, the young businesswoman watched the scene unfold, her frustration with Emma evident. "She's going out of her way to humiliate him," Lisa muttered. "It's so unprofessional." Her companion nodded, his gaze fixed on the Titan. "But look at him. He's completely unshaken. It's like he knows something we don't." Lisa leaned closer. "He's handling this better than I would. She's trying so hard to get a reaction, and he's giving her nothing." At the central table, Mr. Carter sipped his wine thoughtfully, his silver hair gleaming under the chandelier's light. "He's playing a different game," he murmured to his wife, "one she doesn't even realize she's losing." Mrs. Carter nodded. "It's remarkable how composed he is. Most people would have walked out by now, but he's just waiting." Emma returned to the Titan's table, this time with the water he hadn't requested. Her movements were exaggerated, her smile tight. She placed the glass on the table with a deliberate clink, leaning slightly toward him. "Your order will take some time," she said, her tone falsely sweet. "Take all the time you need," the Titan replied, his voice calm and polite. Emma straightened, her lips pressing into a thin line as she walked away. She felt the weight of his steady gaze, and it unnerved her. Back at the counter, she whispered to Jake again. "He's doing this on purpose. He's trying to make me look bad." Jake frowned. "Or maybe he's just here for dinner, and you're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be." Emma ignored him, focusing instead on the diners who were now murmuring more openly about the situation. Lisa, still observing, couldn't keep quiet. "She's digging herself deeper," she said to her companion, "and he's just letting her. That level of calmness is unsettling her." Her companion nodded. "He's teaching her a lesson without saying a word. She's her own worst enemy right now." Emma made another round of the dining room, her frustration simmering beneath her polished exterior. As she passed the Titan's table, she made no effort to hide her disdain. "Not everyone understands the sophistication of a place like this," she said loudly, addressing a colleague but ensuring the words reached his ears. The Titan remained still, his hands resting lightly on the table. He glanced briefly in her direction, but made no comment. Around him, the tension in the room thickened, the silent standoff between him and Emma becoming the center of attention. Mr. Carter leaned toward his wife. "He's not just ignoring her. He's waiting for the right moment." Mrs. Carter tilted her head thoughtfully. "Waiting for what?" Her husband didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the Titan. The scene ended with Emma returning to the counter, muttering under her breath. The Titan, still seated in the dim corner, exuded an aura of quiet strength, his calm presence a stark contrast to Emma's simmering frustration. The murmurs in the restaurant grew louder, an undercurrent of curiosity and tension weaving through the air. Diners leaned toward one another, whispering about the strange standoff unfolding before their eyes. Emma, meanwhile, busied herself at the counter, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She stole a glance at the towering Titan, who sat calmly in his corner, completely unbothered by the scene she had orchestrated. As the minutes ticked by, the glass doors of the restaurant swung open. A man in a sharp suit entered, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. The room's chatter softened as diners turned to look at him. His presence carried an air of authority, and his eyes scanned the room purposefully. This was Mr. Thompson, the restaurant's manager. He stopped briefly at the reception desk before striding toward the Titan's table. His expression shifted as he drew closer, morphing into one of recognition and concern. The whispers in the dining room grew hushed, curiosity overtaking the tension. When he reached the table, Mr. Thompson inclined his head slightly in a gesture of respect. "Sir, it's an honor to have you here," he said, his voice low but filled with deference. "I deeply apologize for the delay and any inconvenience you may have experienced tonight." The entire room froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as diners exchanged startled glances. Emma, standing behind the counter, paled visibly. She watched the interaction in disbelief, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. The towering Titan looked up at Mr. Thompson, his expression calm but kind. "No need to apologize," he said, his voice steady. "I didn't want to make a fuss. I just came here to enjoy a quiet meal." The manager straightened, his face a mix of relief and nervousness. "If I'd known you were joining us tonight, I would have ensured everything was prepared for you personally." At this, the whispers in the room reignited, louder now, rippling through the restaurant like a wave. "That's the basketball legend," one diner murmured. "The Titan? He's one of the co-owners here," another whispered, their tone a mix of awe and disbelief. Emma's face turned crimson. Her earlier confidence and smugness evaporated, replaced by panic. She glanced around the room, realizing that every pair of eyes was now on her. The judgment in their gazes was unmistakable, and her chest tightened under the weight of their silent condemnation. At a nearby table, Lisa shook her head, her voice filled with disappointment. "She's been treating him like he didn't belong this whole time," she muttered. "Now she's the one who doesn't belong." Her companion nodded, his expression firm. "He could have embarrassed her right away, but he didn't. That kind of grace takes strength." Mr. Carter, seated at the central table, leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. "I knew it," he said to his wife. "He's been in control of the situation the entire time." Mrs. Carter nodded. "And he's teaching everyone here a lesson they won't forget." Mr. Thompson cast a quick glance at Emma, his brows furrowing slightly. Turning back to the Titan, he spoke with a mix of respect and urgency. If there's anything else you need, sir, please don't hesitate to let me know. The towering titan nodded, his calm demeanor unwavering. I'm fine, thank you. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. Emma, still frozen in place, felt her legs trembling beneath her. She struggled to steady herself, but the weight of the moment was too much. Her earlier comments and actions replayed in her mind, each one sharper and more humiliating than the last. From a table across the room, an elderly woman, Mrs. Hamilton, whispered to her granddaughter. "It's disgraceful how she treated him," she said softly. "But look at how he's handling it. That's what real dignity looks like." Her granddaughter nodded. "Do you think she'll learn from this?" Mrs. Hamilton sighed, her expression thoughtful. "If she has any sense, she will. Moments like these don't come often, and they have the power to change you, if you let them." Emma's mind was racing. She glanced at Jake, who was looking at her with an unreadable expression. "I didn't know," she whispered to him, her voice trembling. "I didn't know who he was." Jake frowned slightly. "You didn't need to know who he was to treat him with respect," he said quietly before walking away. The Titan remained seated, seemingly unaffected by the stares and whispers around him. He picked up his glass of water and sipped it slowly, his calm presence filling the room with a quiet authority. As Mr. Thompson returned to the counter, he addressed Emma in a low, firm voice. "We'll talk after your shift," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Emma nodded numbly, unable to respond. Her cheeks burned with shame, and her hands gripped the edge of the tray as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. At his table, the Titan set his glass down gently, his eyes scanning the room. He could feel the tension, the curiosity, and the unease swirling around him. Yet he chose to stay silent, letting the moment speak for itself. Lisa leaned toward her companion once more. "This wasn't just about her," she said quietly. "He's showing all of us what it means to rise above." Her companion nodded. "And he's doing it without a single harsh word. That's what makes it so powerful." The scene ended with Emma retreating toward the kitchen, her posture stiff and her face pale. The towering Titan, seated in his unassuming corner, remained the quiet center of attention, his presence a stark reminder of the power of grace under pressure. As the final course was served and plates were cleared, the atmosphere in Lumiere shifted. The tension that had simmered throughout the evening was now replaced by a sense of anticipation. The towering Titan remained seated, his calm demeanor unshaken, even as whispers rippled through the dining room like an undercurrent. Emma stood by the counter, her hands trembling as she fidgeted with a tray. Every glance from the diners felt like a dagger, their judgment cutting through the thin veil of confidence she had worn all night. Her earlier smugness had evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of shame. She stole a glance at the Titan, who was now finishing his meal with the same grace he had exhibited since entering the restaurant. When he set his utensils down and dabbed his mouth with a napkin, the room seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, he rose to his full height, towering over everyone, his presence commanding without effort. The diners, the staff, and even Emma froze, their eyes fixed on him. He turned to Mr. Thompson, his voice steady but resolute. "I'd like to speak to the staff," he said. "It's important." Mr. Thompson nodded immediately, his expression a mix of respect and apprehension. "Of course, sir. I'll gather everyone." The staff, including Emma, hesitantly assembled in the main dining area. They formed a loose circle around the Titan, their postures stiff, their expressions uncertain. Emma lingered at the edge of the group, her head bowed, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She could feel the weight of her mistakes pressing down on her, and she braced herself for what was to come. The towering Titan stepped into the center of the circle, his gaze sweeping over the group. His voice, deep and resonant, broke the heavy silence. "Tonight I came here for a quiet meal," he began, but what unfolded was something far more significant. His eyes moved across the room, landing momentarily on each staff member before moving on. Lumiere is known for its elegance, its sophistication, and its hospitality. But tonight that reputation was tested, and not just by one person, but by the culture we create here. Emma swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the words were directed at her, but she also sensed that this moment was about more than her mistakes. "This isn't just about one incident," the Titan continued. "It's about the way we treat people, not based on their appearance, their clothes, or their status, but based on their humanity. Respect isn't something you reserve for a select few. It's the foundation of everything we do. Lisa, seated nearby, whispered to her companion, "He's not just addressing the staff, he's speaking to everyone here." Her companion nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And he's doing it without anger. That's what makes it so powerful." The Titan's gaze shifted to Emma, who flinched slightly under his steady eyes. His tone softened, though it retained its gravity. "Emma," he said, her name hanging in the air like a challenge, "you made mistakes tonight. You let your assumptions and biases cloud your judgment. But mistakes don't define us. How we correct them does." Emma's lips trembled as she stepped forward, her voice barely audible. I need to apologize," she said, her words halting. "I acted out of arrogance. I judged you without knowing you, and I failed in my responsibilities." I'm so sorry." The Titan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Apologies are a start," he said. "But true change comes from action. Are you ready to take that step?" Emma nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes," she said firmly, her voice gaining strength. "I want to be better, not just for my job, but for myself." The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. A few staff members exchanged glances, their expressions softening. Jake, the quiet waiter who had witnessed the events of the evening, stepped forward. "She's not the only one who needs to learn," he said, his voice steady. "Tonight was a wake-up call for all of us. We've let appearances and assumptions dictate how we treat people. That needs to change." The Titan nodded, his gaze sweeping across the group. "Growth doesn't happen in isolation," he said. "It's something we all need to commit to, together." He turned to the diners, his voice growing stronger. "This isn't just about the staff. It's about all of us. In a world so quick to judge, so quick to label, we have a responsibility to be better. It starts with moments like this, moments where we choose to rise above our biases." Lisa, unable to contain herself, began to clap softly. The sound spread quickly, building into a wave of applause that filled the room. Diners and staff alike joined in, their clapping a symbol of agreement, of support, and of a shared commitment to change. The Titan raised a hand gently, signaling for silence. The applause faded, but the energy in the room remained electric. He turned back to the staff, his tone firm yet encouraging. "This restaurant isn't just about fine dining," he said. "It's about creating a space where everyone feels valued. That starts with you, with how you treat each other and how you treat every guest who walks through those doors." Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his expression resolute. "We'll make the changes necessary," he said. "Training, accountability, and a renewed focus on respect. I'll personally see to it." The Titan nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "It's not about perfection," he said. "It's about progress. And tonight we've taken the first step." Emma wiped her tears, a mixture of relief and determination washing over her. She knew this moment would stay with her, not as a source of shame, but as a turning point, a chance to be better. As the Titan prepared to leave, he turned back to address the room one final time. "Respect isn't just what we give, it's who we are, and it's something we all have the power to choose every day." With that, he stepped away, leaving behind a room full of people who had been forever changed by his words. The restaurant had grown quiet, the last of the diners having left. The chandeliers cast a warm glow over the dining area, now filled only with staff and the lingering weight of the night's events. The towering Titan stood at the center of the room, his towering frame still commanding attention, even in the silence. The staff had gathered in a loose circle, their postures tense. Emma stood at the edge, her head slightly bowed, the weight of her actions pressing heavily on her shoulders. She had replayed every moment of the evening in her mind, each one sharper and more painful than the last. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, addressing the staff. "Before we close tonight, I want to thank all of you for staying. What happened this evening isn't just a lesson for one person, it's a lesson for all of us." The Titan raised a hand gently, signaling to Mr. Thompson that he would speak. "Tonight, I didn't come here expecting anything special," he began. "I came for a meal, like any other guest. But what I experienced became something much bigger." His gaze swept across the group, pausing briefly on each face. This isn't just about what happened tonight. It's about the values we choose to uphold every day. Lumiere is a place of refinement, yes, but true refinement isn't about chandeliers or expensive dishes. It's about how we treat one another. Emma bit her lip, her fingers tightening around the edge of her tray. She knew the words were directed at her, but she also felt that they extended beyond her actions. They were a challenge to the entire team, and to herself. The Titan continued, his voice calm but firm. Respect isn't about how someone looks, how they dress, or what they can afford. It's about their humanity. And tonight, I saw how quickly that can be forgotten. Lisa, still lingering near the entrance with her coat draped over her arm, whispered to her companion, "He's not just talking to the staff. This is for everyone who saw what happened tonight." Her companion nodded. "And he's doing it without anger. That's what makes it so powerful." The Titan turned his attention directly to Emma, his tone softening slightly. "Emma," he said, her name hanging in the air like a challenge. She looked up, her eyes red and glistening with unshed tears. "Yes, sir?" "You made mistakes tonight," he said. "But what matters now is how you choose to move forward. Mistakes don't define us. How we correct them does." Emma stepped forward hesitantly, her voice trembling. I want to apologize," she said. "Not just to you, but to everyone. I let my assumptions and biases dictate how I treated you, and I see now how wrong that was." She took a deep breath, struggling to steady herself. "I can't change what I did tonight, but I promise I'll do better. Not just here, but in every part of my life." The Titan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step," he said. "But change takes commitment. It's something you have to work on every day." Jake, standing nearby, stepped forward. "Emma's right," he said, "but this isn't just about her. We've all been guilty of judging people too quickly. Tonight was a wake-up call for all of us." The Titan's gaze swept across the staff. "Growth doesn't happen in isolation," he said. "It happens when we hold each other accountable, when we commit to being better, not just as individuals, but as a team." Mr. Thompson nodded, stepping back into the conversation. "I'll make sure this becomes a turning point for us," he said. "We'll implement new training, focus on our values, and ensure that respect is at the heart of everything we do." Emma wiped her eyes, her voice breaking slightly. "Thank you for giving me a chance to learn from this. I won't let it go to waste." The Titan smiled faintly. "It's not about being perfect," he said. "It's about progress. And tonight, you've taken the first step." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over the group. Then one by one, the staff began to nod, their expressions a mix of determination and reflection. The Titan turned back to the group as a whole. "This restaurant isn't just a place to eat. It's a place where people come to feel valued. If we can't provide that, if we can't treat every guest with dignity, then nothing else matters." Jake stepped forward again, his voice steady. "We'll make sure that changes," he said. "Tonight showed us what we need to do." Emma, still standing near the edge of the group, felt a mixture of shame and hope. She knew she had a long way to go, but for the first time she felt like change was possible. The Titan stepped back slightly, signaling that the conversation was drawing to a close. "Remember," he said, his voice strong but kind, "respect isn't just something we give, it's who we are, and it's something we all have the power to choose every day." The staff nodded in unison, their determination clear. Emma stepped forward, her posture slightly straighter than before. "I'll do better," she said quietly, her voice steady. The Titan gave her a small nod. "I believe you will." As the meeting ended, the group began to disperse. The room felt lighter, the tension of the evening replaced with a sense of purpose. Emma lingered for a moment, watching as the Titan prepared to leave. She felt a wave of gratitude, not just for the lesson he had taught her, but for the chance to grow. The towering Titan walked toward the door, his figure silhouetted against the warm light of the chandeliers. Just before stepping outside, he paused, turning back to the group one last time. "Now is the time to start fresh," he said, "stronger and better." With that, he stepped out into the night, leaving behind a team ready to embrace a new way forward. The streets of Beverly Hills shimmered under the soft glow of streetlights. The towering Titan stepped out of Lumiere, his broad figure framed by the elegant facade of the restaurant. The air was calm, the hum of distant cars and the rustling of trees, the only sounds breaking the stillness. As the restaurant doors closed behind him, he took a deep breath, his thoughts lingering on the night's events. Inside Lumiere, the atmosphere had shifted. The chandeliers cast their warm light over a room no longer defined by luxury alone, but by the profound lesson left in its wake. Emma stood near the counter, wiping down the surface with deliberate care. Her movements were slower than usual, thoughtful. Her mind replayed the Titan's words, "Respect isn't just what we give, it's who we are." Nearby, Jake stacked glasses, his quiet demeanor now tinged with a sense of purpose. He glanced toward Emma, offering her a small nod of encouragement. "You're doing the right thing," he said softly. Emma paused, her grip tightening on the cloth in her hand. "I just hope I can prove it," she replied, her voice low but determined. "You already started tonight," Jake said. "That's more than most people ever do." At the center table, Mr. and Mrs. Carter lingered over the last sips of their wine. "It's not every day you witness something like that," Mrs. Carter said, her tone contemplative. Mr. Carter nodded. "He didn't just teach a lesson to the staff. He taught all of us something about grace and patience. The world could use more people like him." As the staff finished their tasks, Lisa, still near the entrance with her coat over her arm, turned to her companion. "Tonight could have gone so differently," she said. "If it had been anyone else, this place might have lost its reputation in a single evening." Her companion nodded. "But instead, it became something more. He didn't just handle the situation, he transformed it." Lisa glanced toward Emma, who was now folding napkins with a quiet resolve. "Do you think she'll carry this with her?" Her companion followed her gaze. "It's hard to face your mistakes like that, but if she's willing to change, this could be the moment that defines her." Outside, the Titan walked slowly down the street, his steps deliberate. His thoughts were calm, reflective, as he considered the ripple effect of the night's events. He thought about Emma, her mistakes, her apology, and the spark of determination in her eyes. Change wasn't easy, he knew, but it was possible. And tonight, he'd seen the first steps toward it. He paused under a street lamp, the faint glow catching on his features. Memories of his own life surfaced, moments when he, too, had faced judgment, when people had looked at him and made assumptions based solely on what they saw. Those moments had shaped him, teaching him the value of patience, resilience, and the quiet strength of letting actions speak louder than words. Back inside Lumiere, Emma finished folding the last napkin and placed it neatly on the table. She stood back, looking at the rows of perfectly arranged settings. For the first time, she saw them not just as part of her job, but as symbols of the experiences she could create for others. Mr. Thompson approached her, his expression soft but firm. "Emma," he said, "tonight was difficult, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to grow. I want to see you succeed here, but it's up to you to prove that you've learned from this." Emma nodded, her voice steady. "I will. I won't let tonight be just a mistake. It'll be a turning point." Mr. Thompson studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good," he said, "because this isn't just about Lumiere. It's about who we are, in and out of this restaurant." As the lights inside dimmed, the staff began to gather their belongings and head out. The weight of the evening had lifted, replaced by a shared sense of responsibility. Each of them carried the lesson in their own way, from Emma's quiet resolve to Jake's newfound confidence in speaking up. The towering Titan continued down the street, the glow of Beverly Hills surrounding him like a soft halo. His thoughts returned to the diners, the Carters, Lisa, the elderly woman in the corner. Each of them had witnessed something tonight, something that had the potential to ripple beyond the restaurant's walls. He smiled faintly, thinking of Lisa's words. He didn't just handle the situation, he transformed it. That was what mattered most, not the confrontation itself, but the impact it left behind. He stopped again, looking back toward the restaurant. Its windows were now dark, but the lesson it had witnessed was still alive, carried by everyone who had been there. He thought of Emma's apology, her determination to change. He thought of Jake stepping forward to acknowledge his own biases. And he thought of the diners who had started the night as bystanders and ended it as witnesses to something larger. True change, he knew, didn't happen overnight. It happened in moments like these, moments that challenge people to see beyond their assumptions and choose a different path. As he turned back toward the road ahead, the Titan felt a sense of calm wash over him. Kindness, he thought, wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the small, consistent choices we made every day. It was in how we treated others, even when no one was watching. The lesson of the evening wasn't just for Emma or the staff. It was for everyone, himself included. The power of respect, dignity, and compassion wasn't in their simplicity, but in their strength to create meaningful change. He walked on, the lights of the city stretching out before him, a quiet reminder that the smallest acts of kindness could leave the most profound impact.